In your view, what is the relationship between evangelism on the one hand and efforts to foster peace between world religions on the other hand? As long as you need.
Okay, so evangelism, the efforts of like Christian evangelists, in contrast to the efforts of reconciliation and peace.
Like, what is the relationship between evangelism and then efforts to foster peace, and especially in regards to other world religions?
Well, I feel like evangelism is solely for the purpose of, bringing the truth of, Christ to the nations. But a part of that, like, Great Commission is to, like, serve the poor and the widows and the orphans and stuff like that. So I guess bringing peace and reconciliation is kind of more on that social reform part, and just like helping the poor to live better, or just helping people to live better. So I guess that's kind of where they integrate. However, the peace and reconciliation tends to fall apart because people just focus on the peace and reconciliation. They don't focus on why there needs to be peace and reconciliation. It's because we're in a fallen world. But if you take that out of the Christian context and you bring it into secular context, then it's just, oh well, people are fighting, people aren't happy, people are greedy and selfish and want power. And so I feel like that's kind of, and they misunderstand each other. Well, if you bring them back to truth and that kind of stuff, then that's where that really comes together. So I guess, anyways, there's a connection in my mind.
Okay.
Sort of.
And then,
question.
Would you say that one is more important than the other?
Well, I definitely think evangelism is a holistic approach to bringing peace and reconciliation. So I think that's the more important one.
Well, I think both fostering peace and evangelism both go hand in hand, because without one, such as peace, evangelism is much more difficult to accomplish, and consequently that really inhibits your ability to evangelize with other people if you're not willing to instill that peace and support that in your relationships.
I agree to an extent. I think that simply by the nature of religion that it's almost impossible to have peace between all of the religions without one or the other compromising their inherent ideals, I suppose. That a Muslim and a Christian can coexist, but Islam and Christianity cannot peacefully coexist for any kind of sustained period of time.
Okay. So then, would you say that one is more important, and why?
Well, I think based off of Scripture, probably the more important one is evangelism, mainly because if you're not even evangelizing, if you're just making peace, there's no way you're going to get people to come to the faith. They're never going to know Christ. However, that's not to devalue the peacekeeping side of things, but all in all, evangelism is probably more important just because of the whole conversion criteria.
Yeah, I feel much the same way that evangelism is the more important of the two, but Jesus all the time was about making peace and bringing hope to the broken people, and not he was never about telling all of the broken people, this is how you're wrong and this is why you're wrong and you need to agree with me right now. He was more concerned with finding the wounds in the world and holding his hand up to staunch the bleeding. And the only ones that he ever took to task about, this is why you suck, were the religious people.
All right.
Where should I look?
What?
Where should I look? You or the camera?
You can look at the camera, that's fine. So in your view, what is the relationship between evangelism and fostering world peace among world religions?
Whoa. Evangelism, the term means good news, like giving good news, sharing good news. And intrinsically part of the gospel is peace. Some have gone so far as to take that to mean like world peace, like not fighting in wars. Some people don't. But in any case, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. And so I think that as Christians, part of our responsibility is to foster peace among those of different religions. But at the same time, Jesus came not to bring peace, but a sword. And so I think that in bringing that peace, we will inevitably make enemies, and we shouldn't shy away from that. Because as much as it is possible, as much as it relies on you, live at peace with everyone. And so we should be peacemakers, but we shouldn't avoid strife when it comes, especially when that strife is the result of what we say we believe and sharing that with others. We just need to, in all things, we need to follow the lead of the Holy Spirit, because He's the one who guides us. And if we stray from Him in one way or the other, we're off the right path.
So, would you see one is more important, and why?
If they're one and the same, they can't be more important than the other. I think that when we start thinking of evangelism as getting people saved, then we lose the peace aspect of it. When we start seeing evangelism as, or the gospel as just peace, we lose the eternal aspect of it. It is both. It is the here and now and the not yet. It's the already but not yet. Mm-hmm. And if we don't,
I was told there's no.
We can't just focus on one or the other. But they're not. No, it's not. They're not the same at the same time. I think I lost a train of thought because of the person coming in the door. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah. Like, do you see one is more important, and why?
Okay. Either peace, making peace between people of different world religions, or sharing the gospel is more important. I think the holistic answer to this would be making disciples, because the gospel is not getting people saved. It is not preaching only Jesus. It is going and making disciples. Disciples being sons of peace, daughters of peace, who go out and live peace in the midst of the sword. And so we need to make disciples, not just converts. Because if we make converts, we're going to make a lot of enemies, a lot more than we would if we did evangelism right. That may not be true. We'll make unnecessary anyways. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, okay, so evangelism would be like the purposeful intent of spreading Christian gospel among people. And then fostering peace is trying to be at peace with all people, indicating that you are showing Christ's love to those and encouraging that acceptance, I guess.
But you're not doing anything to change
their religion.
Yeah, you're just going along with it, agreeing with what they have to think.
Yeah. So evangelism is the purposeful intent, whereas fostering peace is more of a relaxed approach of sharing God's love, but not trying to convert or change anyone's opinions.
Because you don't want to fight with them, so.
Yeah.
Okay. And so then, which is more important and why?
For me, I think it's the fostering peace, solely based on the fact that by showing Christ's love, sometimes it's a much more powerful message than just being like, hey, here's my religion, believe in it. There's a really popular picture of like these Muslims that were praying, and and they were in a really controversial place. I forget where this was, but there's like a whole crowd of Christians surrounding them, protecting them so that they could pray. And even though the Christians didn't agree with what the Muslims were praying, like 2 and 4, they were still trying to show that peace and that love and helping them to be able to express their religion, showing, I mean, that was such a stronger message than if the Christians had just watched them be persecuted.
I don't know. I think you need, like, a balance of both in a way. Like, you do need to, like, be there and just, like, accept what they believe, but then at the same time try and get your point across so that they know that even though they do have a religion, it's not the correct one, but that you're not going to, like, hate them for it. So I think you need, like, a balance because one extreme's just not good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Are you asking me the question again?
No, you can just go ahead and answer it.
The relationship between evangelism and fostering peace between world religions. I think that both of them really involve understanding the other religion, that if you're going to evangelize to someone, you'll be more effective if you understand what their view is or what their religion is or their view of religion. And they will be more willing to listen to you if you are willing to listen to them. And I think the same goes with fostering peace between religions, and just having an understanding of where people are coming from and what their views are, and not having misconceptions about what they believe or assuming that they believe something that maybe they don't. So.
Okay. And then which is more important and why?
I mean, I want to say evangelism is important, and that obviously it's important to bring people to Christ. But if people don't view Christianity as being peaceful, you know, and having like peace between religions, then that they may never consider Christianity. So
Okay.
it's hard to separate the two. If you could do evangelism in a very peaceful way,
Yeah.
that'd be great.
All right. Thank you very much.
So, I believe that evangelism has got to be our top priority, but that we don't need to do evangelism at the expense of peace. So, our goal needs to be to evangelize, but we don't need to shove it down people's throats in a way that is harmful to the gospel. So we don't, by not pursuing peace. But if it comes down to a choice between the two, where we have to like decide what we're going to do, if we're going to evangelize or if we're going to foster peace, I think we need to be sharing the gospel. But I think we need to be sensitive, and we need to find ways to do it in a peaceful approach and in a way that builds relationships with people, because I think that's what the gospel is about. It's about building relationships. It's about introducing people to a relationship with Christ, and about them entering into this community of believers. And so we need to continue that community through that. They're both important, but at the end of the day, everybody's going to spend eternity somewhere, and I think we need to do everything that we can to make sure that where they spend eternity is with God. And I think that sometimes we try and put that to the side and do goodwill things instead of focusing on the gospel. So both need to be done. Both need to be done well. And unfortunately, the gospel is sometimes made to be into a bad image because we just shove the Bible down people's throats at the expense of tactfulness and grace and not discretion, but like grace and love. So both important. Just gotta do it. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, we're good.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of definitions in that question that could be defined probably a little bit differently. I think personally, a lot of people tend to generalize world religions, like call world religions really world cultures. What is really world cultures? And like a lot of times people are like the relationship between Christianity and evangelism in relation to other cultures, like incorporating that into evangelism in different cultures, especially cultures that have different religions, is that a lot of times there's issues with approaching with a Western American world, like image of the world, worldview, other than just religion, and assuming they have the same like system of beliefs, even outside of like the religion. And a lot of times there's a lot of cultural things that go into it too, just even like the way people dress and things like that it's important to like live in the world and to but not be of it, so you can live in a culture that believes a certain religion and be culturally accessible without being offensive to that culture. And once you build those relationships, a lot of times the evangelism can come through the relationships. So a lot of times you go indirectly with evangelism, especially when there's a huge conflict in religious beliefs. And so first you have to get used to the culture, and then use your relationship within the culture to be able to share the gospel. So like, I don't think it has to be a question of one or the other being conflict. Like, it doesn't have to be conflictory. It doesn't have to go against each other. If you approach your evangelism in a personable way that doesn't offend the person in a cultural way, eventually they'll see that there's something different in you. there's something different about you in the way that you present yourself, in the way that you treat others and things like that can greatly influence them. They can even maybe even approach you because of seeking their heart seeking for God. So I don't necessarily think it has to be something that's in conflict with each other. A lot of times people will do ministry in such a way that they try to impose the American Western culture first and then try to like force the religion on them, and that's not an efficient way of bringing about evangelism, because it's not taking into account that person and how they believe. Just as an example, I was a missionary kid in Brazil, and even though it's mostly Roman Catholic, there's a lot of Spiritism that's mixed in there too. And part of like our ministry was getting to know the people first and having that basis of relationship before we even approach the topic of religion, because evangelicals have a very bad name in Brazil because of the way that the Presbyterian Church is televised, and they auction off prayer, and they are really manipulative of God's word and use it out of context and things like that. So especially the middle class and upper class are very closed to the gospel, even though it's a Roman Catholic background type of culture. So even like our family had to acclimate ourselves to the culture and get to know people before we even started to approach the subject of religion. And once we started getting to know them and they could see some of how we expressed ourselves differently and how we treated other people differently, and they were curious as to why that was, and that made it so that we could evangelize. So even though it's not quite as extreme as like the example of Muslims or Hindus, especially Muslims, are fairly very closed countries to Christianity. It doesn't have to be in conflict, in my opinion, the two issues. And like it's important to, as far as like world peace in relationship to religions, it's important to not be judging in the way that you express yourself, and the approach of Bible bashers of you're going to hell. That's not the most effective way of doing evangelism, for one thing. And a lot of times like peace between religions means, oh, you have to accept everything, it's all relative, everything is right. But if you think about it, it doesn't make sense because they're conflictory. They conflict. It's not like they could possibly work together. They are opposites. They could never overlap in truth. And so there has to be one that's true in thinking from a more like general observational view. So because there has to be one that's true, you can't just say, oh, you believe that, that's great, I'm sure that's true too, your beliefs are just as true as my beliefs. That moral relativism doesn't work with mixture religions, and usually just confuses people. But so there's a balance between needing to treat people with grace and also with being, how do I say it? Being caring about them as individuals, and making sure that it's not a confront as a just because my religion is different, we can't even have a relationship in kind of thing. So and even like in education and things like that, it's important to learn about other worldviews so that you can learn how to express your beliefs in relationship to the other worldviews. So just like with Foundations of Christian Thought, we learn how to interact with these different beliefs and how we how our faith is different and how we can express that even through our daily lives. So I would say evangelism is more important, but it's not.
Okay.
But it's not necessarily conflictory with peace between religions, because you can treat people with respect, even if you don't agree with their religion, and even that treating them with respect can eventually lead to evangelism. So yeah, that's my spiel.
Thank you.
Okay. I think that the relationship between evangelism and fostering peace between religions ultimately comes down to Jesus Christ. He came to the world to give the good news, and that's what the gospel is. And so evangelism is sharing the gospel, and so sharing the good news of Jesus. And I think when you share the good news of Jesus, there comes a time where you take into consideration everything that he taught us. So he taught a lot about ministering to the poor, and reconciliation between people, and how everyone is equal under his salvation. And so if you take that into consideration, who Jesus Christ was and what we're preaching about, I think that the relationship then becomes, our evangelism becomes a part of fostering peace between each other, because he preached a gospel of peace. So I don't know if that completely makes sense, but preaching about Jesus should eventually teach us how to speak to one another, because he wants us to come together and love one another. But where there is a dimension of we do want to see the whole world know Christ, I think that starts with us knowing Christ and understanding that in order to communicate his message, we need to be at peace with one another, and we need to be able to listen to each other and take the things that we understand and express them in ways that aren't hateful and don't divide us further. So I think that it comes down to us knowing Christ and really wanting to present Christ to the world in a way that would make him proud.
All right, so which is more important and why?
I would say that in my mind, they're equally important. But I think that at some point we have to be at peace with one another before we're able to listen to each other. And so, whereas I can see how both would tie into each other, I'm almost leaning towards that world peace would be a little more important at first, because we need to begin that journey of fostering peace with one another and loving one another, and stop fighting and saying prejudiced things about each other and stereotyping people and getting so down each other's throats about who's right. I think if we come to a conclusion of just being, one race of humanity at some point, then I think, having that peace and having that ability to relate to one another without all that other junk in the way is going to make evangelism more approachable and not as pushy. Because I feel like right now, evangelism has a stereotype of being those pushy people that try to get you to believe in Jesus because you're going to hell, and I don't really think that that's the best way to foster world peace necessarily. So I feel like coming to peace with one another, and Jesus is a huge part of that, but coming to peace with one another and then bringing the message in the midst of that would probably be most important.
Awesome. Thank you.
Whenever, I guess, you're approaching evangelism, if you have an attitude of superiority, and that you claim, and you claim to be better than others instead of a servant, that kind of comes along with treating other religions as inferior, not because they aren't true, but just because you're bringing your own pride into it, I think. And so in order, if you're gonna, sorry, this is a really strange topic. So, oh man, I had somewhere I was going to go with that too. But when you're approaching evangelism, you need to go with a servant's heart. which means not saying that you can kind of allow the chance for their other religions to be true, but kind of with a humble attitude to show the people that you're serving, that you're ministering to, that you don't know all the answers, but you do have this awesome relation with Christ that's changed your life. But if you approach them with a prideful attitude, saying that it looks like you know everything and that they don't know anything, then that can kind of shut down the door and everything else.
Okay.
Hopefully that makes sense.
That does.
Okay.
And then, which would you view as more important, and why?
I would, if you have one without the other, then of course you're going to kind of have half of a mission. But I would still say evangelism, because that was, the Great Commission. It didn't say to make peace with the world religions. It said to go and make disciples. And so while you can, if you are making disciples, if you are evangelizing, I think there will be some fruit in that. And if you're just focusing on making peace with world religions, first of all, I feel like that's kind of it's kind of impossible in one way, just because of the way that they are in conflict and the way people are. But if you just focus on that, then you're not really guaranteed to see fruit, I don't think.
All right. Hit it.
Okay. I think the relationship between evangelism and world religions are fostering peace in world religions. I think they can be the same thing if Christians are doing evangelism the right way. The most effective evangelistic strategy that I've seen is just sitting and getting to know people. And that's a biblical model. That's the way Jesus did it. He went to people where they were and immersed himself in their culture, i.e., he came from heaven to earth and he immersed himself in our culture. And I think something that Jay Kessler said is, people that say, oh, I don't believe in God. Well, then you sit down with them and say, well, what is it that you don't believe about that God? Because I probably don't believe that stuff either. And so you sit and you get to know what people believe, and from there you can talk about what you believe, and from there, if the opportunity arises, you can talk about the differences. Because I think the best way to foster peace between anything is to just create situations where you can get to know people. Because when you know people, you're much less likely to hate them for no reason. And I think that is the root of conflict between those religions, is just ignorance and not understanding what they are and not understanding what they believe. And so I think it's both and. I think peace between world religions is the result of effective evangelism, because peace is a characteristic of Christ. And so when we are like Christ, we are fostering peace.
All right, so which is more important and why?
Well, because I wouldn't say they're mutually exclusive, I would say that appropriate evangelism is more important, because if it's done well, then peace will result. And so it's both and. And so instead of working towards a result, which is the peace, work towards, expanding the kingdom of heaven. And from there, peace will result. So, yeah.
Awesome.